Let's pray. Sorry. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for tonight once again that we get to gather together and worship you, God. I just pray that we just know that you are our hope in life and death, God, and that we pray to you and that we come to you. I pray that you speak through Pastor Michael and that we learn something new again tonight. Just name we pray. Amen.
I think my first encounter with the name Gideon was when I heard my uncle talk about handing out Bibles to people for free. Has anybody ever heard of the Gideons? Okay, a few people. Basically, the Gideons organization is a group of businessmen, former businessmen, people who interact in the world, not really pastors and preachers, but people who want to get together and they raise money to buy Bibles and they hand out Bibles to people for free. If you go to a hotel and you look in the top drawer and you see a Bible in there, it was probably put in there by the Gideons. But that was the first time I ever heard the name Gideon. And when I eventually heard the story in the Bible, I was really confused that Gideon never handed out Bibles or went to hotel rooms or preached on street corners. That's not the story of Gideon. The gist of the story that you usually hear when you're a little kid about Gideon is that Gideon was this weak, small, insignificant person, but God chose him and gave him lots of strength, and he ended up leading the Israelites, or the Israel, to defeat their enemies. And that's great, but that's only about half of the story. And like we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, this whole series that we're in is about the real story. Getting beyond just the surface of maybe the one supernatural event. Like with Noah, it's getting beyond just the flood and Noah building the ark. It's looking at the whole life of Noah and what are we supposed to learn from his life. It's getting beyond just Samson bringing down the mansion on the people in one last effort. It's getting beyond Samson and the donkey bone. It's getting beyond that to see the real story. And tonight we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at the real story of Gideon. And the main point for tonight is that the real story of Gideon is about trusting God more than you trust yourself. The real story of Gideon is about trusting God more than you trust yourself. All right, so go ahead with me. We're going to be in Judges. We're going to start in Judges chapter 6. We're going to be 6 through 8. But like the last couple of weeks, we're not going to read all 3 chapters. So don't worry. You'll have time to go home and eat your second dinner and do your homework. Judges chapter 6. So the first point, like I said, we're talking about Gideon trusting God more than you trust yourself. And the first point tonight is that Gideon and the people of Israel did not trust God. Gideon and the people of Israel did not trust God. So there's our problem, right? It sets up our problem for the story. So let's, if you would, look at Judges chapter 6, verse 1. You got it? You there? Thumb up? Cool. All right, so here we go. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. All right, from the very beginning, we learned something very interesting. All of Israel was doing evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, if we go back and we look at the book of Judges, this is a pattern that happens over and over and over again. From the very beginning of the book of Judges, it's basically, it sets it up of, this is the story of how they kept messing up, and then I kept having to send people, and then they kept messing up. That's the whole book of Judges. There's like a circle. Things are bad. They cry out to God. God sends help. They repent and trust God. And then over time, they do evil. And to the point where they cry out to God, and then He sends help. It's just this vicious cycle that happens over and over and over again. And in chapter 6, we're stuck right in the middle of that cycle again. God saves them, they follow his word, and then over and over they drift away. Their lack of relationship to God proved their lack of trust in him. Because over time they drifted from him, because over time they allowed other things to get in the way of their relationship with him and trusting him and following him, all it does is just prove that they do not trust him. Why? Because if they did, then they would continue to live according to his word. They would continue to want to honor him with how they live and how they conduct their business with the other people around them. All right? So, people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. Who knows who Midian is? Or where the Midianites come from? No one? Bible trivia anything? Come on. It's your chance for gold stars. Before Easter even. Okay. I'm not surprised. It's kind of this weird thing that happens and it kind of gets buried in some things, but what you'll see here is that by understanding who the Midianites are, you'll understand that it's just it goes right back to the cycle of drifting away from God. Who are the Midianites? The Midian was the son, if we go back to Genesis chapter 25, verse 1 and 2, you don't have to flip there, I'm just referencing it. You'll see that it says that Abraham had another wife other than Sarah named Keturah. And one of their sons was Midian. Was Abraham supposed to have another wife? Okay, so we see that became a problem. The Midianites were worshipers of Baal. And in Numbers chapter 25, verses 17 and 18, a little bit before that, we see a story here where the Israelites interact with the Midianites, and it's not a good thing. There's actually women from Midian that draw out the men of Israel, and they get them caught up in adultery and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And they're doing things in response and worship to Baal. So God comes to Moses and says, strike them down. Strike down the Midianites. Well, I don't know about you, but to strike down would mean to get rid of them. Yet, here we are in Judges chapter 6, and they're still here. And actually, it says that they had grown to where you couldn't number them. That's how how their population had grown. All right, so we see here Israel's lack of faithfulness to God. That they only existed because of unfaithfulness, and they continue to exist because of unfaithfulness. The fact that the Midianites existed here proves that Israel lacked trust in God, because God over and over again told them what to do, and they did the opposite. And now they find themselves in where the people that weren't supposed to exist and then were supposed to be taken out are now the same people that are attacking them. See the problem? All right, verse 2. And the hand of Midian overpowered Israel. And because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. Okay. So not only is a relationship with God strained, not only have they not done what they've been called to do with the Midianites already, but now they find themselves in a situation where they are afraid. And they're fearful. And their fear proves their lack of trust in God. They're hiding and living in caves. We'll see here in a little bit when we get to the next section when we read that Gideon, our strong and valiant warrior, is actually found by God working in secret so that he won't be found by the Midianites. They're afraid. Side note, this is for you. I came up with this, and we kind of look at this from our perspective and what we're supposed to learn from this. What do? We lack trust in God in the same exact ways. We distance ourselves in our relationship with Him and we ignore His Word. So when we lack trust in God, we are also distancing ourselves from our relationship with God, and we're not trusting His Word. It goes hand in hand. Two, we lack trust in God when we fail to repent of and deal with our past. Just like Israel didn't deal with the Midianites and their failure to be faithful in the past, and they just kind of swept it under the rug and said, oh, they're fine over there, that's not going to be a problem. And then many years later, it's a big problem. It's like whenever you have a sin in your life, and you never repent of it, and you don't really deal with it, and you don't really get rid of it, and you don't put it to death in your life, and then you're like, oh, I'm just going to ignore it, it's going to go away, it's fine, it's not a problem. And it just sneaks up and bites you on the ankles all the time, because you don't deal with it. It's because we lack trust in God that He is faithful to forgive, and that through His Spirit, He can renew us. We need to be willing to deal with our past and our past sins. 3, we fear the world more than we fear God. The Israelites feared Midian more than they feared God. They were doing evil and living in sin, and they were hiding in caves because the Midianites were riding their camels in the town and stealing their food. Yet they were living in evil in the sight of God, and it didn't faze them one bit. Are you more concerned about the fear of the world, or are you more concerned about your fear of God and who He is and who we are? We show our lack of trust in the same way. All right, so we see how Gideon and the Israelites in a whole did not have trust in God. So what is God going to do? Well, like I said, in our cycle of things, what He ends up doing is He comes to the people, He hears their cries, and then God is going to teach Gideon how to trust Him. God taught Gideon how to trust Him. This is the next step of things. He hears the cries and God responds. He says towards the end, there, like verse 7, 8, 9, it says that there's a prophet, an unnamed prophet that comes into town. Does he say, guess what? God's going to get rid of those Midianites? No, he says, you guys are doing evil and wicked things in the sight of God. We need to take care of our own hearts first before God's going to do anything against our enemies. But God comes to Gideon. So I'm just going to read, this is chapter 6, verses 11 to 24. This is the biggest chunk of the night. So I'm just going to knock it out, and then we'll go from there. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abizrite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, O mighty men of valor. And Gideon said to him, please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all His wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian. And the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you? And he said to him, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the last in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. And he said to him, if now I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please, do not depart from me here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you. And he said, I will stay till you return. So Gideon went into his house and prepared a young goat and unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and the broth he put in a pot, and brought them to him under the terebinth and presented them. And the angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on this rock, and pour the broth over them." And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of his staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. Then Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. And Gideon said, "Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace be to you. Do not fear, you shall not die." Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day it still stands at Ophrah, which belongs to the Abiezrites. So we're gonna see here that God is going to teach Gideon how to trust him in 4 different ways. In 4 different ways. The first one is that Gideon learned to trust God because of his presence. Gideon learned to trust God because of his presence. In verse 11, it says that the angel of the Lord came to him. Is this an angel? What do you think? Just read over that again on your own. I'll take a second here. What do you think? What I see a lot of heads nodding no. What makes you think that the answer to that is no? Right.
Cats and dogs.
All right. What do you think? You're shaking your head no. You don't think it's just an angel. What makes you think that it's not just an angel? Yes.
Doesn't see the person as the angel of the Lord, but then it also says the Lord said.
So when the angel speaks, he's saying,
The Lord says.
the Lord says. What else? Do angels accept worship?
No.
Who accepts worship? Does the angel say that God will be with them, or does the angel say that I will be with you? So I'm going to tell you a big word. In the Old Testament, when we see the pre-incarnate Christ, or God show up, we call it a Christophany, which is just meaning that God shows up in a person form and he speaks to people in the Old Testament. He does this in several different places. As you're reading through and you can look those up on your own. But God is going to teach Gideon how to trust him because of his presence. The angel of the Lord comes to him. God comes to him. Is Gideon sitting there going, "Hey God, I need to talk to you"? No, Gideon is hiding. And God comes to him. And the first words that the angel of the Lord says to him in verse 12 is, "The Lord is with you." Not, "Here's what I need you to do. Here's how this is going to work." Not, "These are all the tasks that I need to do." The first thing that the angel of the Lord tells him is, "The Lord is with you." So the first thing that he wants Gideon to know is that God is with him. How can we trust God? by knowing that God is with us. He then goes on and says, when he starts talking about how he's going to go take down the Midianites, and he asks them, how is this going to be possible? I can't do this. I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak, I'm weak. And he goes, the Lord is with you. The Lord is with you. The other thing about the Christophany thing that seals the deal here is, what is Gideon's response after he goes away? In verse 22, Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord, and Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. He's afraid again. Why is he afraid? Because he's seen God face to face, and he knows that he is doomed. Because all throughout the Old Testament, he's heard about how if you see God face to face, then his glory will be too much for you to handle. And here God says, I have allowed you, I've spent time with you, I've made this happen, my presence is with you. Do not be afraid. I am with you. So, how can we trust God? First and foremost, we can lean on the fact that he is with us. He is with us. Second, Gideon learned to trust God because of his promise. His promise. The angel of the Lord says, I am, the first thing he says is, I am with you. And the second thing he says, O mighty man of valor. Was Gideon a mighty man of valor? Would Gideon become a mighty man of valor? Yes. So if something is said, but if something is told to somebody, but it hasn't yet happened, but it will happen, what's that called? A promise. It's called a promise. He's speaking that to Gideon. He's letting him know that this is the promise that's about to happen. He tells him to go. Notice that the angel of the Lord doesn't say, well, first you need to get an army together. First you need to do this. This is how you need to train them. If you want to have a chance in battle, you've got to get some good weapons. It says in verse 14, and the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. It's a guarantee. It's a promise. It's going to happen. Why does the promise have power? Going back to it, because I will be with you. God's promises have power because of his presence. It works together. So we can trust God because of his presence. We can also trust God because of his promise. Number 3, Gideon learned to trust God because of his power. His power. Gideon learned to trust God because of his power. Gideon brings, not knowing what's really happening, Gideon brings an offering. Some meat, some bread, some broth. And how does Gideon realize that he's standing before God? Because of the power, the fire that he's able to command to burn up the offering. That's the thing that happens that Gideon then looks at and goes, oh, I've been hanging out with God. Oh no. It's because of the power that's been displayed. He could trust God. Number 4, Gideon learned to trust God because of his peace. His peace. He first eases Gideon's initial fear of dying because of his presence. He says, peace be with you. And then in realizing this, Gideon then responds by calling him what? The Lord is peace. Peace. Think about this. The people of Israel thought they were all alone. So what does God send to Gideon? His presence. Presence is the opposite of alone. The Israelites thought they were hopeless. Why are people hopeless? Well, because there's no promise. So what does God give Gideon? A promise. This promise is the opposite of hopeless. They were weak. They were weak. Gideon was weak. It's the opposite of weakness. Power. And they were afraid. What's the opposite of fear? Peace. Peace. Now, I wish this was the end of the story, and I wish that everybody lived happily ever after. And for a while, things look great. I mean, Gideon goes off, he destroys the altar that's designated for Baal worship in his community. They get all mad about it, and it all goes down. His dad, he was one of the worshipers of Baal, actually backs him up. It inspires all the people. They didn't want to follow him. He gets a big army of like 30-something thousand people. And then God tests Gideon, and he offers these tests up to the people because he gets the army down to 300 soldiers that he's going to defeat at least over 120,000 Midianites. We know there was at least 120,000 because 120,000 died. 300 people versus 120,000. And you're thinking, man, this is awesome. God is the real deal. God showed up with his presence. God showed up with his promise. God showed up with his power, and God showed up and brought peace. But then chapter 8 happens. Chapter 8 happens. And Gideon lets the success that was obviously all God get to his head, where he starts to believe that maybe I'm something. Has anybody ever gotten in a place in your life where your head got too big? Yeah? Started thinking too highly of yourself. You thought that the success that you had was all because of you, but really it was somebody else, or it was a group effort, but you took credit for it and lifted yourself up. Well, Gideon does this to the max, and what we're going to see the last part here is that Gideon ended up trusting himself more than God. Gideon trusted himself more than God. So, in chapter 8, we're not going to read the whole thing, but just if I were to read the whole thing, you would notice something very different about chapter 8 from chapter 7 and chapter 6. In chapter 6, the angel of the Lord, who we know as the pre-incarnate Christ here, comes and speaks with Gideon. He sits down with him. He talks with him. He interacts with him. He tells him what he needs to do. In chapter 7, there's moments when God comes to him. It says that the Spirit clothed Gideon, and he had this relationship with him. And you saw the interaction of that relationship in the selection of the soldiers getting down to 300. In chapter 8, the voice of God goes silent. There's not a single verse in chapter 8 that says, and the Lord said, or the Lord led. God's presence disappears. His presence disappears. Now, Gideon speaks, and Gideon makes decisions, and Gideon does things according to Gideon's will, but God's presence disappears. The other thing we see in chapter 8 is that God's promise is replaced by Gideon's lies. God's promise is replaced by Gideon's lies. Go to chapter 8, verses 22 and 23. Now I'm going to read this, and you're going to go, man, you go, Gideon. Like, this is where it's at. This is, if you want to have like the perfect Sunday school answer, Gideon had the perfect Sunday school answer to this situation. Chapter 8, verse 22 and 23. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." Whoa. They're about to make this dude and his whole family king. All right? Verse 23. Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Right? That is like Hobby Lobby quality material right there. I am telling you. It's like, for me and my house to serve the Lord, and the Lord will rule over you. Like that's all you need right there. Sounds good, right? Everybody agrees. That is a great response to that pressure. But what does Gideon do? It's not about the words, it's about the actions. Look at verse 24. And Gideon said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil, for they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites." So they're like, "You become king. You rule over us. You lead the way, Gideon. You saved us." He goes, "No, the Lord will rule over us. But also give me your gold." He immediately taxes them, like a king. And you're thinking, okay, well, maybe he was thinking like, okay, while we're at it, let's make an offering to God, or we could use this to invest in our nation, our people. We could help the poor. We could help all those people that had lost all that food from the Midianites for all these years. What does Gideon do with it? He makes a cool sweater vest out of gold called an ephod. It's a fancy vest, and it was meant for only one person, the royal priest. Do you remember reading about how Gideon was a royal priest from the tribe of Levi? No. So not only was he taxing like a king, but now he was trying to act like a royal priest. A priest and a king. What ends up happening? The Israelites end up using the ephod as an idol for worship. Gideon also took on many wives and concubines, like a king, like the pagan kings that surrounded them. And towards the end of his life, he named one of his sons Abimelech. You know what Abimelech means? My father is king. But wait, I thought Gideon said, I'm not your king. But yet he names his son, my father is king. You see the problem here? He let everything get to his head, and God's promises got replaced by Gideon's lies. That's what happens when we begin to trust ourselves more than we trust God. Okay, what's next? God's power. God's power is replaced by Gideon's abuse. Judges 8, verses 13 to 21. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, and he captured a young man of Succoth and questioned him, and he wrote down for him the officials and elders of Succoth, 77 men, and he came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna about whom you taunted me, saying, Are they in the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted? And he took the elders of the city, and he took thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them taught the men of Succoth a lesson. And he broke down the tower at Penuel, and killed the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, Where are the men whom you have killed at Tabor? They answered, As you are, so that were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king. And he said, They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you. So he said to Jether, his firstborn, Rise to kill them. But the young man did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a young man. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, Rise yourself and fall upon us. For as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. As I read that, you can see the rage and the anger burning in Gideon. He invokes the name of God, of the Lord, in verse 19. But you can tell that this is about personal vengeance, and it has nothing to do with God's glory. You guys wouldn't give us any bread, so now we're going to teach you a lesson. Those people were my friends and family, so I'm going to kill you because I'm mad, because it's all about me. Notice it didn't have anything to do about God's glory. But it was about his own personal vengeance. And then at the end, he tries to get his son to kill them. God's power got replaced by Gideon's abuse. By God's peace. God's peace is replaced by spiritual chaos. God's peace is replaced with spiritual chaos. The end of chapter 8, starting in verse 3, says, As soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and poured after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side. And they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon. Didn't even consider his real name, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. Gideon dies and all hell breaks loose. The Israelites, you heard my ugly word that's in here, but basically you see this word over and over again in the book of Judges, and it means this, that even though God was wanting to have a relationship with his people, the people of God, the Israelites, kept chasing after other women, chasing after other gods, and pushing God aside to chase after all these other side gods. And therefore, adulterating themselves to Baal. They claim to be God's people, but then they snuck around with Baal on the side. Baal-berith means that not only did they do this, not only did they build these other altars to this fake god, but they made a covenant with this god. Meaning that they all came together, and went, Baal, whatever you do, we'll just do this for you if you do this for us. There was a covenant made. Meanwhile, the God who had already made a covenant with them was like, are you guys serious right now? I just took out the Midianites and all these other armies that were stealing your food. And now this is what you're doing. They forgot everything that God did, and as a side note, they trashed the name of Gideon, this great man of valor. There's no more. The real story of Gideon shows us the difference between trusting God and trusting ourselves. It shows us what happens to us personally when we decide to either trust God or trust us. Gideon got to the point where he trusted himself more than he trusted God for his own salvation. Meaning that Gideon thought that he could be safe and he could keep himself safe because he was the guy who could keep people safe. But ultimately he died just like everybody else, and he was not remembered. He was not honored. Who will you trust for your salvation? Will you trust yourself? I mean, there's some days when I don't trust myself to wake up on time. I don't trust myself to make healthy decisions when I go eat somewhere. I don't trust myself to always say the right things to people. I'm sure you have your list. But yet sometimes we're willing to trust ourselves for our own salvation. Well, I'm a good person, so that'll get me there. Well, I go to church on Sunday. Okay? Or will you trust God for your salvation? The one who shows up with his presence. The one who offers peace. The one who has the power to do the things. And the one who has promised to save you through Jesus. Who will you trust for your salvation? If you've never given your life to Christ and trusted him for salvation, I hope that you would consider doing that tonight. Don't wait. Let tonight be the night. Come talk to me after. You can also talk to one of our other adults in here as well. Who do you trust? Do you trust God more than you trust yourself? Let's pray. Father, I thank you for tonight. I just can't help but right now be broken. To be broken over anybody who doesn't know you, doesn't have a relationship with you, that hasn't given their lives to you, that hasn't trusted you as Lord and Savior. Because they're missing out on you. They're missing out on the true salvation that you offer. God, I pray by your Spirit that if there's somebody wrestling with that truth, that you would give them the answers in their hearts, that God, you would speak to them right now. That as Gideon sought to get validation from you early on before things went down, that God, you would give them validation in their hearts. That they would know that you were the one true God. And God, I'm broken over the person who has maybe started off loving you and trusting you, that has given their lives to you at some point in their lifetime, but right now has let things come between you and them. They've pushed your presence away. And for the people who are living without hope because they don't think that there's hope, but God, you've already offered them everything that you need. I'm broken over the people who continue to live lives thinking that they're powerless to sin, when sin only has the power that we give it. God, I pray that you would remind those here tonight that are struggling, that have let things get in the way, to return to your presence, to your promise, and to your hope. God, I pray that we would not be like Gideon and fall away and trust the things of this world, but that we would continue to seek you and love you above everything else. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.